For this gravel build, I'm not going to go with the obvious drivetrain choice. Instead of Shimano GRX or SRAM, it will be something different. I'm using the Wheeltop EDS GeX, a wireless electronic gravel group set from China. I already used the Wheeltop system on my road bike, and honestly, it worked better than I expected. But of course, gravel is a bit different. There's a lot more dirt, vibrations, and chain movement, and a lot more moment where the drivetrain has to be more reliable. So before this goes onto the bike, let's see what's in the box and have an overall impression of how they feel like. So inside the first box, we have the rear derailleur, the shifters, and the charging cables. Now, starting with the rear derailleur, it does look a bit bulky. And the derailleur body also has a bit more prominent branding, as you can see the GeX labeling over here. As a comparison, this is how big the derailleur looks like when I put it beside the Shimano GRX. But keep in mind that this is not an apple-to-apple comparison because this GRX group set is the mechanical version. The road version of the Wheeltop group set has a bit more subtle branding on the rear derailleur. Also, for the road version of the group set, the derailleur cage is made out of carbon. But over here in the gravel version, the derailleur cage is made out of aluminium. And that is definitely because they want to make sure that the rear derailleur is pretty robust on gravel roads. And similar to the road version of the group set, the battery sits neatly and tightly in the rear derailleur. Unlike SRAM, the battery isn't designed to be quickly detached from the rear derailleur for charging or for swapping. But it can be removed if needed by undoing the screw in the rear derailleur. Keep in mind, by doing that you might be voiding the warranty, so do it at your own risk. When I move it on my hand, nothing feels loose or rattly, which is a good sign. The cage also has a lot of tension to it and the whole unit feels really solid. So far, pretty good. Now, let's take a look at the shifters. This feels very familiar because they look very similar to the hydraulic shifters on my Wheeltop road setup. I already know the shape of the shifters from my road bike, but I was hoping that the gravel version would have feel a bit more updated. And in fact, if you buy the gravel version, you actually get the EDS GeX version of the shifters in the gravel set. So there's actually no differentiation between the gravel version of the group set and the road version of the group set when we talk about the shifter themselves. From my experience riding with the Wheeltop EDS GeX, I feel like the shifters is a bit too small on the hoods. I mean, it's not unusable or anything, but I actually prefer bigger hoods for longer rides because I feel that it's a bit more ergonomics. And if you're like me and you're used to the Shimano shifters, if you grab the Wheeltop EDS GeX shifters, you will definitely feel the difference in size. But actually it's not that bad because they did update something and it is something I really appreciate. One of the biggest pain points on the old Wheeltop EDS GeX shifters is that the rubber is super hard. In the road version, the rubber was so hard that it was actually quite difficult to flip it back and expose the screw underneath the rubber for any adjustment. And for this new version, they actually updated the rubber. And this definitely makes maintenance like bleeding the brakes or adjusting the shifters way more easier. On top of that, they also added some textures to the rubber for more grip. Whereas the old version of the shifters do not have any textures on the rubber. But other than that, I don't see at least any downgrade to the shifters. The buttons feel clicky and responsive, and the lever also feels reachable, at least for medium-sized hands. But yeah, all of these are actually nothing new for me because I've been riding with the Wheeltop EDS TS for 1 year now almost. So yeah, maybe in the future they will improve the size of the hood on the shifters for better ergonomics. Alright, why don't we take a look now at the braking kit. Now, the first thing that I realized when unboxing the braking kit is that the brake calipers definitely got an upgrade, at least visually. For comparison, this is how the old version of the brake calipers looks like. doesn't look exactly cool. But the new version of the brake calipers visually looks much better in my opinion. Now, whether there's actually any improvement in braking performance, that is something we still need to find out. But as a first impression, I like it. And included in the braking kit are also these small parts, which are essentially the stuff you need to set up your brake calipers on your frame and connecting them to your shifters. So basically, these are all of the stuff out of the box. So price was definitely one of the main reasons why I went with this group set. At the time I'm filming this, the price of the Wheeltop EDS GeX, depending whether you buy the aluminium version or the carbon version, is around the 600 euros mark. So depending on the time when you're purchasing it, you might get it cheaper if there's an offer. So it's not cheap, but compared to Shimano Di2 or SRAM wireless setup, I feel like the price and the value is way better. And one of the biggest selling point of this derailleur is that it is flexible and it can support from 3 to 14 speeds. You could also actually get this group set from third-party sellers from AliExpress or other websites, but I think like the safest place for you to purchase this is definitely from the Wheeltop official website due to the warranty and customer support. And now, moving on to the more practical details about the group set. The charging cable for the derailleur still uses the magnetic cable. I was also hoping that they would have actually upgraded the charging cable or the charging port to a typical USB-C, but it's not a deal breaker. The reason why I was hoping for that is because the connection or the magnetic port is sometimes a bit weak, so a slight touch might interrupt your charging process. But again, how often does this happen? The battery in the rear derailleur has a capacity of 800 mAh, and according to Wheeltop website, it can last you around 20,000 shifts per charge. And based on my experience using the Wheeltop EDS GeX, if you're like me riding once or twice on weekends, it definitely could last you months until you need to charge your group set. The shifter uses the typical CR2032 coin batteries, so they're not rechargeable like the rear derailleur. The derailleur is IP67 and the shifters are IP65, which means they should be fine in rain, dust or wet gravel rides. There are actually two rear derailleur cage options, the 75mm and the 93mm version. The 73mm version can support up to a maximum of 46 tooth sprocket, and the 93mm version can support up to a maximum of 52 tooth sprocket. I went for the 93mm version because I wanted more range for the cassette in this build. Since this bike is going to be one by, I won't have the front derailleur to give me an easier climbing gear. So having the big cassette on the bike will definitely help with some climbs and bike packing, especially when the bike is loaded with a lot of bags and weights. I'll probably not gonna use it all the time, but it's actually better to have the option than having to suffer later. The calipers are flat mount with 140 and 160mm rotor compatibility. And similar to the Shimano system, the hydraulic brakes over here also uses mineral oil. The type of the brake hose being used in this group set is the Shimano BH90. And the brake pads are also Shimano style, so replacement should be pretty easy to find. One of the reasons why I'm willing to try this is because I've tried the Wheeltop EDS GeX before. I used the Wheeltop EDS GeX on my road bike, and to be honest, I expected a lot of compromise. But in the end, it surprised me in a good way. The shifting is good enough that I kept using it, and the setup is also very flexible. And it also makes the bike feel a lot more modern with wireless shifting without me having to spend the money on Shimano Di2 or SRAM Access. If the Wheeltop EDS GeX had been terrible, I wouldn't have put it on this YOELO build. But of course, the compromise is still there. Shimano Di2 or SRAM Access would have been a safer choice. The parts are easier to find, a lot of shops knows them, and you are also paying for years of trust. And the fine-tuning and initial calibration using the app is still, to be honest, a little bit finicky. But then again, it is something that once you get it right, you're probably not going to touch it again. And customer support is also a lot of concern for probably a lot of people, but in the past, I contacted Wheeltop customer support and I got a replacement shifter without any issues. And as a bonus point, that is without them knowing I make videos on YouTube about cycling stuff. But for this YOELO Altera G21 build, I wanted something simple, wireless, and 1x setup. 2 cables, less to maintain, and no front derailleur. And with the 93mm derailleur, I can use bigger cassette for steeper climbs and bikepacking. But the bigger question now is how well this Groupset works actually on gravel. Basic shifting is not really my concern because I actually already had good experience with the road version of the Groupset. What I care more about this time is the chain control, the feel of the new improved brake, the gear ratio and range, as well as reliability. If there's a constant chain slap on rough gravel, now that's gonna be a problem. If the brakes don't feel control on loose gravels or loose surfaces, also a problem. And because this is 1x, the cassette range has to work on road sections as well as gravel climbs. So that is my first look on the Wheeltop Gravel EDS GeX before this Groupset goes onto the full bike build. So finally, the next video will be building the YOELO frame and installing this Groupset onto the frame, and we're gonna see how the setup goes. And if the bike build goes well, we're gonna see how this Groupset performs on the road and on gravel sections. So please subscribe to the channel if you want to follow the full build journey and see whether this Groupset was actually a good choice to put on this YOELO Altera G21 frame. And let me know in the comments whether you would actually trust a Chinese Groupset to put on your gravel bike, or you would rather stick to the usual Shimano and SRAM, or maybe for the some of your Campagnolo. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching until the end, and don't forget to like and share this video to your cycling friends and family. I'll see you in the next one.